Well, I've got 6 o'clock. If y'all don't mind, we'll get this thing cranking because we got another meeting at 7. So we need to try to get our business took care of tonight pretty quickly. First thing, I forgot, I will try to take notes and take care of our minutes for tonight. First order of business is review the minutes from the July 8th meeting. They're on the back of this little handout that you've got. You hadn't had a chance to look them over. Take a look at them and see if there's any corrections or additions or to them. Mr. Walsh.
Make a motion to approve the minutes.
Have a motion to approve the minutes as presented. Mr. Davis has a second. A motion by Mr. Walsh and a second by Mr. Davis to approve the minutes as presented. All in favor, please say aye. 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 Any opposed? That is done. First order of business is to elect officers for the coming year. The committee now is composed of Rick Davis, Jerry Ford, Bill Ferguson, Gary Walsh, Jason Sullivan, Ethan Bowles, and myself, and the mayor also will serve on this committee. Open the floor for nominations for chairman. I would like to request that someone else step up and be chair. I'd be glad for someone else to take over. Mr. Walsh.
Make a motion for Bill Ferguson to be chair.
Have a motion for Mr. Ferguson to be chairman. Have a motion and a second for Mr. Ferguson to be chairman. Is there any other nominations? Are there any other nominations? Any other nominations? Hearing none, we will close nominations. All in favor of Mr. Ferguson, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Congratulations, Mr. Ferguson. Open the floor for vice chair.
Nominate Mr. Walsh, Gary Walsh, vice chairman.
Okay. Mr. Davis has a second. We have a nomination for Mr. Walsh to be vice chair, and Mr. Davis has a second. Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Seeing none, we'll close nominations. All in favor of Mr. Walsh being vice chair, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? It is done. Okay. Open the floor for nominations for secretary.
Nominate Dwight Jewell.
Mr. Jewell has been nominated to be secretary. Are there any other, is there a second? Okay, we do have a nomination of Mr. Jewell by Mr. Ferguson and a second by Mr. Davis. Are there any other nominations? Jason, are you sure you don't want to do this? Okay. Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Okay.
Chairman.
Yes, sir.
Can we nominate the high school member?
Yes, sir.
I nominate him.
If he will serve, you want to do that?
Be a good experience.
Okay. Okay. So we do have 2 nominations, Mr. Jewell. We have Mr. Bowles. Is there a second to Mr. Bowles' nomination? Well, I guess you can. Okay. We have 2 nominations. Are there any other nominations? Any other nominations? Any other nominations? Okay, let's see. We have 2 nominations currently on the floor, Mr. Jewell and Mr. Bowles. What would be the best way to do this? I guess just take them in the way they came. And you don't vote for 2, vote for 1. All in favor of Mr. Jewell? We have one. Okay. All in favor of Mr. Bowles? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3. I believe Mr. Bowles has been elected secretary. Thank you, Mr. Bowles. Appreciate your to serve. And if you have any questions about how to format it or what we need to do, just get with me and I'll be glad to help you. Okay. And do you want to go ahead and do them for tonight, or do you want me to go ahead and try to take care of them tonight? Okay. I'll be glad to. Not a problem. All right. Next, we'll get into discussion items. First is we had invited all the commissioners to be here, and many had indicated they would be. I'm kind of surprised that they're not, but we've got some monumental changes proposed, I guess would be the way to put it, to the BEP funding formula coming down from the state. What information I've had on it has not been anything that I thought was a good thing at all whatsoever. And in talking with Mr. Kerr and Dr. Satterfield about it, I think the school board is of the same opinion. And what we're wanting to do is just try to let everybody know some of the things that are being proposed and how it could possibly impact us. And I think we're going to see and hear more of it going forward into the first part of next year, I'm sure, once the legislature gets back into session. But now is the time for us to be looking at it and to be contacting our state representatives and senator and trying to give them our feedback and input on these things. So Dr. Satterfield, I'd appreciate it if you would just kind of take the lead and tell us what you've got, what you've learned, what you found out, and we'll try to follow along. Yes, or you can sit there and use it, or you can go to the podium, whichever you're more comfortable with. Whichever you're most comfortable with. Thank you.
Is that working? Okay, it's kind of a little intimidating here. First of all, try to find out where to start. I'll try my best not to persuade anybody and just try to educate you as much as I can this evening. One of the things we did with our school board last month is we tried to, tell them what I knew, tried to give them a little literature to read. I don't want to leave you with something in your hand that you can take home and look at a little bit. Superintendents across the state are skeptical of this plan. One of the reasons is that wasn't a lot of front loading of information. It's kind of sprung on us. We had a superintendent's conference in September. They had somebody from New York or Washington to talk to us about different funding mechanisms, but at no point in 4 days did they ever say they were looking at a new funding formula. And then only 2 weeks after you get back, then the state makes a public announcement that they're looking at a new funding formula. What concerns us is that, and I feel comfortable saying this in a public forum, is that the state has new reoccurring funding that the governor and the State Department is willing to go in and to tap into and to put more money, reoccurring money, toward education. But they have no appetite whatsoever to put it into the existing BEP funding formula. So basically what they're saying is it's deal or no deal. That confuses us. One of the things that's wrong with the BEP now, as most of you in this room know, that it's underfunded. You know, one of the examples is like for nurses, you get like one nurse per 3,000 students. That's a ratio based. We'll talk about that in a minute. I didn't know this, but do you know how many nurses are funded by the state of Tennessee in the BEP formula? Across the state of Tennessee, how many nurses are funded? 352. And I think we can all realize that that's underfunded. Assistant principals, most district, our district, I was talking to Cannon County today. You know what we're funded for our assistant principal? We have 3, 1 in each school, a half. We get a half of assistant principal. The rest of those funds are coming from local funds. And the issue is with us is that changing the funding formula in any way could be catastrophic for small counties like ourselves. So for example is they could put more money into a new formula. And at first that feels good, but over a period of time, you could lose out. You know, if they put more money in on the front end, like seed money, but then they change the way it's funded, then over time, proportionally, you could have less. For example, this is why it's so important. There's 144 school districts in Tennessee. Trousdale County ranks in the bottom 25th percent, 101st in the percent local funding, what local funding puts in. So what the state puts in drives over 80% of what we do. So if the state funding formula gets skewed over time, it will be a catastrophic effect to our students. The next thing is that right now, in total state, federal, and local funds, that our per pupil expenditure is about $9,200 per student. And that puts us ranks us about 70th in the state. So we're using our resources, our different funding pots pretty well, but we have to be really careful. I was on a call with the commissioner today with about 12 other superintendents, and this was important. She said there's about, from these meetings, oh, by the way, and I'm going to go over a PowerPoint. I am a member. They've got 18 subcommittees. I am a member of the school personnel subcommittee, and I'll go over that in a minute. But one of the things that she said, there was 3 clear themes, is one, we know the present funding formula, the BEP, is underfunded. Everybody in the state realizes that. Second is we want to be sure that counties and districts have flexibility to spend these funds the way we want to, you know, because there's a difference between a funding formula and a spending plan. So we don't want the state coming in and tell us exactly how we spend it. So what we're really talking about is how those funds are generated. And then the last one is what I've every time that I get a chance to speak, you can see the commissioner turn her head because she knows what I'm about to talk about. And that's the fiscal capacity and the local match. That some districts are more wealthy than other districts, and they have the physical capacity or the ability to pay. We have to be sure that that's addressed. And Mr. Jewell, that's one of the things that you and I have talked about, is that we don't feel like county commissioners have been brought to the table at all in this process. I have said that to the commissioner, and she told me today that conversation about fiscal capacity and local match, she said, Clint, is a very long runway. You know, we're just getting started, and we're going to involve those people in due time. I mean, that's what she told me. So I am continuing to try to advocate on that behalf. She said that as early as December, they're going to start planning out for having some small group discussions, which would consist of school finance departments, mayors, school board chairmen, and the like. So we'll see where that goes. But what you have in front of you is a PowerPoint. And since, I don't have that capacity to show that, I'd like to go through that with you for just a second quickly and want to save some time for some Q&As at the end. But if you'll look on page 2, and that's paginated for you, is that first bullet there is powerful. It says that the conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect on the current BEP formula until a new funding formula is recommended and approved by the state. So again, you've got to hear this piece is the powers that be are talking about a new formula or no deal. They're not talking about trying to revise the BEP. That is important for all of us in this room when we talk to those state decision makers, because we don't think everything's wrong with the BEP. We think it's underfunded and it needs some overhaul, but I don't know if we have to throw the baby out with the bathwater. The third bullet is, again, they're talking about the focusing on developing a new formula rather than revising the current formula. So I want you to see that language. And then there's 18 subcommittees that are making recommendations about what should be included in that new formula. So when you turn to page 3, so it says, what is public school funding? It's the monies that districts receive from the state and local dollars. They can say federal, but it's not federal. The decisions that we make, what we work with, will always be local funds and state funds. And then that method in which the districts are allocated the funding, the way we're allocated funding, makes all the difference in the world in how we can service our children and grandchildren of Trousdale County. So this funding mechanism is a big, important thing for all of us in this room. When you turn to 4, that says hallmarks of a good formula. One of the things that they will talk about with the BEP, that it's hard to understand. It's in a lockbox. There's 46 components. There's 2 different funding formulas. There's the CBER and the TASER, and they count 50% of the piece, and it takes accountants and attorneys to explain how it's complicated. And because of the complication, then that creates some advocacy for a new one. But they're talking about some hallmarks, that it's easy to understand, that it's sustainable over time, and that it's flexible over time, that you can add and take away from it. Now, when you go to page 5, these are the big things to educate yourself on, is what are the types of state funding? They talk about a student-based. Everything about this new formula is called a student-based model, where there is a baseline that every student gets. You get X amount of money for every student, sort of like you do the BEP. Like right now, we get about $7,200, $7,300 per student on the average, is what everybody across the state gets, if you averaged it up. So what they're trying to say is trying to figure out what that base is. Let's say that's $5,200, and then having extra weights that they would add to it. So, but it's student-based, and you're going to hear something about weights and multipliers. And here's the big ones you're going to hear: students with disabilities, economically disadvantaged, and ESL, which is English as secondary language. Those are the most popular. There's other ones, and we'll show them to you in the PowerPoint. The second one is resource-based. They're going to say the BEP is a resource-based. It's a funding formula. You get X amount of money or teachers based off of how many students you have. We're all familiar with that. Actually, I don't think the BEP is a pure resource-based. I think it's kind of a hybrid. Some of it is resource-based, but some of it is student-based as well. For example, Mr. Kerr, like special ed students, gain different values based off the level of their disabilities. And then the other type of formula is categorical. That'd be mostly your federal funding, like Title I. And then when you move to slide 6, you will see, and this is a big advocacy point, is that 39 states have already moved to a student-based formula. And Tennessee is one of the few states that are left behind. One of the things you will hear the commissioner talk when she says, and she talked about today, you know, we're going to get you superintendents, we're going to get you some sample formulas, and we're looking at Texas and Maryland. And those are the samples we're going to bring. Now, you know where the commissioner came from? She came from Texas. Okay. So a lot of this comes out of Texas. When you move to slide 7, you will see, if you'll start at the bottom of that pyramid, you know, the first thing is establishing a base. The second thing is establishing some weights. And if you get that base that's the same amount for all. And then the weights are variables based off the level of student needs. So if you move to slide 8, turn the page, and this is talk about base samples. So looking at the base is looking at your teachers, support staff, counselors, nurses, transportation, administration, response to RTI. Those are things that every student needs. When you move to the next slide, when you move to a student base, you're going to hear them really talk about those weights. And you can see there, poverty, economically disadvantaged, special ed, students with disabilities, English language learners. But there are also some other possible weights that they're being talked about, like students in early grades carry an extra weight than those in the latter grades. Students with dyslexia, students that are gifted, even a small district component. If you were, you know, a small district, then those students could generate more money if we could get that in that type of formula. And the reality and sparacy, you know, because that's one of the things that we would fit in. But when you're talking to people, those components do not carry the legs that poverty, students with disabilities, English language learners do. Then as you move to slide 10, you know, the direct funding samples would be like our summer learning camps. You know, they give us money directly for one-time expenses like summer learning camps and like our CTE programs. So that would be an example of that. And then on page or slide 11, where it says, this is something that they've put in literature, but they don't talk about, and this is about outcomes. So school districts that have higher outcomes would get bonuses, you know, if their students scored higher on ACT, earned industrial certification, got dual enrollment, some of the things that we're doing to prepare students for post-secondary now. Now, when you turn to slide 12, you'll see again that there's 18 subcommittees. They've had 8 town halls. I don't know if you've seen this in the news. The first one was at Merle Hyde. I know me and the Vidette guy, Chris, sat side by side on the kickoff town hall, right, Chris? And I think Chris did an excellent story. I don't know what issue of that in the Vidette, but he did a really good job reporting. You can go back and read that, but he captured that really well. Those are completed. The last one was completed this week at Jackson County. And then they've got Twitter. If you do social media, you can reply to that. So on slide 13, this is the process or the structure. They're gaining feedback from these committees. Vanderbilt is running a poll, the town hall meetings. This meeting is fed into subcommittees that then goes to a steering committee, and it is the steering committee that develops a plan that will go to the state legislature in their next session. And I'll tell you this, their game plan is to get something in front of the legislature in this session and get it passed in this next session. So there's not a lot of time on this. So this is going to move quite well. If you'll move on to slide 15, which is the last slide, you can see the timeline. We are already in those subcommittee meetings. We are ready to start next week on meeting number 6. And then you can see that the final feedback is on January the 6th. And then they expect a recommendation by the 24th of January. So that's the timeline. That's where we are. I don't think is anything much more important than keeping our eye on this and learning more about it as much as we can, and to stay in touch with our legislators. I know I've talked to Senator Hale a little bit about this, and you know, he hadn't made up his mind at all. You know, he's watching that. So that's what we want to do, is keep an open mind at this point in time. So we'll try to discuss it and answer any questions that you may have. But I am not a representative of the Tennessee Department of Education.
I have just a couple of questions. On number 6, where they're talking about hybrid, how many of these that are shaded dark are hybrid, and how many are fully student based, and why? If I mean, at least in my estimation, we should be hybrid.
Yes.
And we're not.
Yes.
And so I wonder what are they classifying, or who's classifying those? Because it doesn't look kosher to me.
Right.
And the other thing that really jumped at me in what you were saying was on the 18 public committees. And of course, they say they're made up of local public officials working feedback sessions, superintendents, school board members, county commissioners, municipal, special school district, financial oversight leadership. I don't think, my understanding, out of the 18 subcommittees, there was one county commissioner, and he was put on there because he was a doctor of education, and they even did not know he was a county commissioner. And there was little to no mayors, my understanding. So local government has totally been left out of this whole plan. I don't know whether that was purposeful. I can't help but believe that it was, just to, because we're the ones that's going to be asking the hard questions. And those are the two things that have jumped out at me on this. And I know that there was a lot of talk about these subcommittees and the fact that, they had no local government input other than the superintendents. There were, school superintendents as well, it should be. But I don't know.
We are skeptical as well. And, this conversation, Mr. Jewell, started with you and I sitting at a table back at the Chamber of Commerce. And my question was, what kind of information have you received? And you said none. And I said, well, that's what I'm afraid of, because it just has been thrown on us in the last couple of weeks. And that's the reason we're meeting here tonight, is to try to educate everybody on this. But when the state is funding 80% of your public schools, and they're talking about changing that formula, it gets really important. So we're really going to have to keep our eye on this. We're going to have to communicate and work together. We're going to have to stay in contact with our legislators. But I am telling you, there is a push hard from the Department of Education is to move on this. You can see this. This is their PowerPoint. This is their PowerPoint. And they intend to have a plan in the next General Assembly, and they plan to get a vote on that in the next General Assembly. So time is of essence.
The plan has probably been formulated already. It's just a matter of going through the motions to try to make it either garner some support or make it more palatable to people that might question it. But, all we can do is watch it.
The superintendent's organizations had one meeting on it. And I can tell you from inside the superintendent's organization is we would like to revamp the existing BEP. We know it's underfunded. We know that some things need some correction, that type of thing. But, we've been told that the state, again, has extra reoccurring funds that they're willing to put toward education funding, but they are not going to sink those funds into the existing funding formula.
One thing that I haven't heard brought up, and y'all may have talked about this, and you may or may not know, BEP came about because, of course, a lawsuit, small school systems lawsuit that we participated in. I think your dad was one of the ringleaders of it.
He was.
And my thing is, how are they going to be able to do this and not violate those court orders, or has there been any talk about that?
Yes, the
Okay.
State Department will not speak to it. They said, you know, they're tied up in a lawsuit, you know, this BEP lawsuit. And they are not going, and that actually they're using that as cover not to talk about the BEP because they said it's in litigation and they can't talk about it. And that's why they're only talking about a new plan. I mean, that's their storyline.
Mr. Davis?
Yeah. So just a quick question. Going through that, you mentioned like on the slide 5 there, student base, now somewhere approximately around 7,200
Yep.
per student. So is there a model at all that we're able to look at to plug in our county numbers to be able to see based on what they're looking at, what would that number possibly be underneath this new formula at all?
Mr. Davis, we're asking the same questions. We were told today that they're going to get a Texas model and a Maryland model to us to let us start looking at. But superintendents and any of these in the committee I'm on, we have not seen any type of modeling.
So at this point, they haven't mentioned, hey, it's going to be higher than what your current
No,
average is or lower.
they're talking about lower. I mean, I've definitely heard the state talk. They said, you know, you're 72, 73. You know, we're talking about dropping the base down to about 52. I mean, I'm telling you, that's what I heard. And then start adding on the weights to get you back. So it may be, we may not get back to where we are. You know what I'm saying? Our base may decrease. And after they apply the weights, we're getting less than we did when we started, which would be catastrophic for our students.
I mean, that's what bothers me. If we feel like we're a little underfunded now, then we can't go back the other way. You know, what is a small counties going to do? We're going to have to suffer with less money, which is going to mean, you know, less qualified teachers, less whatever. I mean, that bothers me.
Well, and here's another thing is, and this is what I was alluding to. I think we have to be really careful when the state says we will give you new funds to convince you to come over to this new funding formula. And in the first few years, you do have more money than you had. But when those weights change over time, over years, you will gain less, you could gain less funding over time than you did under the old formula. And that's where we've got to be careful. Another thing that we have to be very careful about is this word they call portability, which means, and you will hear people talk about the money should follow the student. So all of a sudden is, where does that money go? A charter school is a public school that's directed by the local board of education. But what about non-charter schools, private schools, home schools? So all of a sudden is, now if a student is worth $5,500 and now they have portability, and now those students go somewhere else, we've still got to run the same number of mileage of buses. We've still got to heat and cool the same square footage. So all of a sudden, that puts us in a deficit situation really fast.
I forgot to ask, I apologize. Okay. That idea of portability is the term they're using. A lot of people feel like this is just a backdoor way to go to vouchers. We've heard about vouchers for years and the attempts to do that. And whether they're good or whether they're bad is not an argument that we can, or a discussion that we could ever agree on tonight, I'm sure. But it does affect us in that we probably would have a lot more students wanting to come to school here than wanting to leave the school here, because our school system is so highly rated that people that live in adjoining counties or close to the line, I think what we would see would be a mass influx, which there again, you say, well, you're getting those dollars, but if those dollars aren't sufficient to cover the cost, then that's not helping you any. And I think that's a lot of the concern. And, you know, as long as you have room for them, then that's not necessarily a bad thing. But when you get into overcrowding and things of that nature that you very well could, that's when, and I think the part of that that's left out of this equation, if the state was funding schools 100%, but when we're taking local tax dollars to fund this 2018, 24, whatever it is, winds up being, are we going to take our tax dollars to Charleston County to educate people's kids in Macon County? You know, so there's some really complicated, I hate to use the word political questions, but just economic questions that this whole thing really, they're not talking about, they're not being upfront about, and they're just not, I don't want to say they're not being honest about it, but they're not being real forthcoming. It's kind of like Paul Harvey, tell me the rest of the story, you know, and I think we have to take it with a grain of salt and really monitor it and look at it. I know the County Commissioners Association is vehemently opposed to this and looking at it as hard as we can look at it, and we'll get the information that we need from our side. And I know the School Board Association is in the same boat. And I don't think that these people are trying to necessarily mess over our kids. I think they're truly trying to find a way to make it better. I just don't know that it's going to be, you know.
We just want to be sure it doesn't set us back.
Yeah, I understand. Mr. Kerr, could you use the mic, please?
One of the things I think the state's probably trying to do in this is kill two birds with one stone. They're going to try to settle the lawsuit that they're in now, which are, some of you may not know, it's with Metro, Memphis, Hamilton, the big counties with all the tax base and everything they have. And so they're going to, anything that they settle that way for them could not be good for us, because any dollars that go to them has got to come from somewhere, and that's from us smaller counties. And I think we also have to remember that we're still running a deficit budget anyway, and have been for years. We've never made up that $500,000 deficit from several years ago. It's never been made up. And so as that continues to draw down our fund balance, whatever this funding formula does to us in the long run could just make that even worse. They're going to tell you that you're going to get more money, that you're going to be held harmless is the word you're going to hear from the state for a couple of years. And that'll work until Bill Lee's out of office and he can go on, and then you don't know what's going to happen. But in the long run, future governors are going to adjust those weights depending upon the economic climate of the day. And small counties typically are the ones that get hurt from that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I agree, 100%. And I know that people that are probably more familiar with this than a lot of us have looked at this and said the only people that are going to benefit from this are going to be the large school systems. You know, that it's absolutely best you could ever hope for would be to be a neutral standpoint. But they're certainly needful, I'm sure. And they have their best interests at heart, just as we have our best interests at heart. And we just have to, sometimes you might be the littlest one in the room, but you can still be the loudest. And, I think that's I believe I told Governor Sunquist that one time. I'm from Trousdale County. We're little, but we're loud. And so I think we just have to watch it and be aware of it and do the best we can with it.
And I just want to make everybody aware, the timeline is really quick.
Go ahead.
Just like to remind the commissioners, mayor and all the commissioners that if y'all can pass it on is hopefully you've received your invitation to the Christmas breakfast that's on the 16th. And we would love to for y'all to be able to come to that 8 o'clock at the high school. If possible, please RSVP to Ms. Carmen, just so we'll know how much food to order, that type of thing. But we haven't been able to do things like this in so long. It's good for Trousdale Countyans to be able to spend some quality time together and not always be concerned about a dollar or this or that, and just enjoy, especially at this time of year, to be able to enjoy each other's company. And so we'd just like to remind y'all of that. Let the other commissioners know we would love to have y'all come to that.
And Mayor, we want to be sure you get everybody in your office. If you'll close down enough for them, send them over there to eat with us. I know you can't make it, but see if you can get them over there to eat with us if you can.
I'll pass it on to them.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Committee members, anyone have anything you'd like to ask or say? Mr. Mayor?
I'd just like to let everybody know that tomorrow is the deadline for any mentors that want to volunteer for the Tennessee Achieves program. That's to help the students that are going to graduate, make sure they've got all their stuff together. Right now, we still need as of about 1 o'clock today, we still needed 3 more mentors. So if anybody's interested in doing that, go to the county's Facebook page and we have a link so you can sign up to be a member, a mentor. And they do have online training and whatnot. So all the information should be there online. Just follow that link.
Thank you.
Come down in our agenda to public comments. Is anyone here that would like to make any comments that's in our audience tonight to what we've talked about tonight? Okay, seeing none, entertain a motion to adjourn. Mr. Walsh.
Motion to adjourn.
Mr. Walsh makes a motion to adjourn. Mr. Ferguson makes a second. All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We are adjourned.